Right. So our next speaker is on stage already. Now we're gonna hear a talk by Sebastian Schnelle. He is a licensed psychiatric nurse. I think also he is a co-founder of PARAB, people that organized it here today. So he also put in a lot of work to make this possible. And he is part of Elisa Society and even Rave. So he's been working in this space for a while. And today he's going to talk about the influence of personality traits on psychedelic effects of mescaline. That's going to be the focus, but he's also going to talk about other non-pharmacological factors influencing the trip from 2 clinical trials that have been done here at the university. Give a warm applause for Sebastian.
So, welcome everybody. Can you hear me? All right. Today I'm going to present my master thesis on the influence of personality traits on the psychedelic effects of mescaline. But indeed, to make a short break at the beginning, I'm going to talk about this little guy. I don't know if you see it in the back. It's peyote and it contains mescaline. It's a very small one. I bought it 2 years ago and it did not really grow yet, but I'm doing my best. So, it contains mescaline, and if you taste it, it's very bitter. It makes you puke. It has small little spikes, and it hides in the desert. So, yeah, you could ask, why is that connection? Why is a human being eating such a thing in the first place? So. And despite all the effort of the peyote to protect itself, the people of Southern and Northern America use peyote and mescaline since thousands of years. So this nice quote depicts this strange connection of humans and psychedelics very well. I'm going to read it out. The passionate desire which leads men to flee from the monotony of everyday life has made him instinctively discover strange substances. He has done so even where nature has been most niggardly in producing them and where the products seem very far from possessing the properties which would enable him to satisfy his desire. So I'm going to leave it at that for a second. So, to the facts, a quick overview. First, I will give some information about the background and the rationale of my thesis. Then I will explain some theory about mescaline, personality traits, and the predictors of psychedelic effects, followed by my research questions and hypotheses I tested. In the methods, I will explain the study design and the psychometric measures. After that, the results, finishing with limitations and conclusions. Good. Background and rationale. As we all have heard and know, probably serotonergic psychedelics show promising potential to have beneficial effects on mood and anxiety disorders. The subjective effects of the serotonergic psychedelics I'm going to talk about, like psilocybin, LSD, and mescaline, have been shown to be dose-related and comparable at psychoactive equivalent doses. I'm going to explain what psychoactive equivalent doses are the next slide. Furthermore, the quality... Come on. Sorry. The quality of the psychedelic experience has been shown to predict better therapeutic outcomes. So that goes a little bit into the questions, do we have to have a good experience, or is a bad experience also okay? We also heard about that mystical type experiences also predict improved therapeutic outcomes. Besides drug dose, also non-pharmacological predictors can influence psychedelic effects. Thus, the assessment of individual predispositions could help to enhance positive effects and prevent negative responses. The theory. I'm going to talk a little bit about serotonergic psychedelics. I think you all know something or more than something about it, but yeah, hallucinogens like LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline induce changes in perception, affect, altered sense of space and time, feelings of bliss and unity with the universe, but also anxiety, panic, or psychotic states. Serotonergic hallucinogens belong to three main chemical classes. The plant-derived tryptamines, on this slide it is psilocin as an example for that. The phenethylamines, which is in this case mescaline. The ergolines, which are semisynthetic, in this case LSD. And on the slide you can also see the structural formula of serotonin 5-HT. You see some differences, but also some similarities. So mescaline has certain differences in its chemical structure, but also it shows like similar clinical effects compared with LSD. Thus, ergolines and phenethylamines may share a common mechanism of action. The effects of psychedelics are mainly associated, or serotonergic psychedelics are mainly associated with the agonistic action on the serotonin 2A receptor. Sorry, it's all maybe a little bit of things you know, but I will do it anyway. So, the therapeutic effects of psilocybin and LSD have been shown for depression and anxiety. And also, the psychedelic effects can be reduced or even reversed by the administration of the serotonin 2A receptor antagonist ketanserin. I don't know if you heard of that, but that partly proves that the serotonin 2A receptor activation is primarily responsible for the subjective effects. Okay, mescaline. As I said before, mescaline is a hallucinogenic plant alkaloid contained in peyotes and pedro and other cacti. The psychedelic effects of mescaline share similarities, as I said, with other serotonergic psychedelics by stimulating the serotonin 2A receptor. Now to the doses. Doses of 500 milligrams of mescaline, 100 micrograms of LSD, and 20 milligrams of psilocybin produce comparable subjective effects. But there are differences. Like pharmacologically, mescaline is less potent than LSD and psilocybin, and thus a much bigger dose is needed to produce hallucinogenic effects. In the study that I used, it was like minimum 200 to 400 milligrams of mescaline to even produce hallucinogenic effects. Also, compared to LSD and psilocybin, mescaline shows a longer effect duration at higher doses, specifically 10 to 12 hours, so pretty long trip. A delayed onset of action, so you have to wait longer. And a longer time to reach maximum plasma concentrations and the peak effect. So that's a little different. Also, not also, but the studies that I had data from found no significant differences in the physiological effects, like adverse effects or blood pressure and things like that of mescaline compared to psilocybin and LSD, except for some slightly more subacute adverse effects that is like 12 to 24 hours after drug intake, headaches, feeling a little bit dizzy, feeling a little bit tired, but yeah, just subacute and after the trip. So, okay. Good. Personality. I used, in my thesis, I used the Neo-FFI inventory. That's like an inventory measuring 5 basic personality traits. It's based on the 5-factor model of personality. The first, or one personality trait would be neuroticism. Neuroticism refers to a defensive and anxious coping style. Individuals with high neuroticism become more easily distressed, are more sensitive to external threats, and show greater vulnerability. Openness to experience represents a more assertive coping style, expressed by greater curiosity, wider range of interests, flexibility, and creativity. Extroverted people seek excitement, are talkative, energetic, and outgoing. Extroversion shows in greater sociability, as well as in dominant and confident behavior. Fourth is agreeableness, that is represented by kind, sympathetic, altruistic, considerate behavior, and agreeable people are more empathetic and get less angry over others. So would be a good thing, I think. And lastly, conscientiousness shows self-disciplined, responsible, planful, and efficient behavior. Conscientious people can delay gratification, are productive, and able to control their impulses. They would also be nice. So what is to say about personality is that it develops and changes over time. So people in adulthood become more stable in general in their personality. And also, like a side note, is that personality traits can also be affected by psychedelics, but that will not be the topic of my talk now. So, and as I said before, I used the NEO-FFI, that's the inventory measuring the scores of these 5 personality traits. Predictors, that is basically like the thing that I tried to build my thesis on. As you all know, psychedelic effects are also context dependent. So not only drug and dose, but also context. Context involves external factors, but also internal factors like expectations, intentions, and mood. Drug dose is a bit of an ambivalent thing because it's correlated with both mystical and positive, but also with challenging experiences. So just raising the drug dose doesn't help for everybody. So next to that, higher scores in the personality trait of neuroticism are associated with greater challenging experiences. So more anxiety and feelings of loss of control in the psychedelic experience. Also, higher scores in openness, I called it openness to experience here, scores predict more positive and mystical type experiences. And that's what we want. We don't want the bad things. They can turn out to be good, but I think we want the good experience. So I tested that. So as another predictor that I looked on, age or higher age predicted or there were mixed results in the studies that I looked on, and generally there was a tendency that higher age produced less intense acute effects. So the older the participants were, the lower the psychedelic effect had been. And also I looked on female sex as a predictor of psychedelic effects. There were also like mixed results, but generally, or the studies that I looked on showed that females showed lower scores for good drug effects, and also lower scores for other positive psychedelic effects. And lastly, the last predictor that I tested was previous experience with psychedelics. I didn't test how many psychedelic experience you had before, just as a dichotomous variable. So either you had used psychedelics or you did not. So, and with that also, previous experience with psychedelics predicted lower intensity of positive as well as negative effects. Okay. My research questions and hypotheses. The main goal of the thesis, as I said before, was to analyze the influence of personality traits and other non-pharmacological predictors on the intensity and quality of the psychedelic effects of mescaline. I have to be a little bit faster. My main research questions were like which personality traits predict positive and which personality traits predict negative psychedelic effects. The main hypotheses to that were like I said before, higher openness to experience scores will predict higher quality of psychedelic effects, and higher neuroticism scores will predict lower quality of psychedelic effects. Also, importantly, I additionally included biological sex as a predictor in the main hypothesis because there were studies that showed that sex is affecting the results in the end. I also had an additional research question, which was, do other non-pharmacological predictors influence the psychedelic effects? And the additional hypotheses were higher age, female sex, and the previous use of a serotonergic psychedelic will predict lower intensity of psychedelic effects. Methods, just real quick. I used 2 studies from Basel, both with mescaline. The first study compared 100, 200, 400, and 800 milligrams of mescaline, and everybody got each dose. And the second study of Lai et al., they compared LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline doses. So from that, I used 300 and 500 milligram data. So in all, it were 97 mescaline administrations at these different doses, and there were like 69% of the participants had previous experience. From the neo-FFI scores that were measured before the application, like in the screening, there were significant differences between the scores of the participants compared to a norm sample. I will do a remark on that later. And also differences between the scores of males and females. Females scored significantly higher in neuroticism than males. I will also have a note on that in the discussion. And compared to a norm sample, the participants were more open and less neurotic. So that affected the results. That's why I say it in advance. So the 5-DAC score, I'm gonna just real quickly show you that because we heard about that before. Basically, the 5-DAST rates the peak subjective effects retrospectively, so after the trip. And oceanic boundlessness measures positive psychedelic effects. And higher scores on oceanic boundlessness represent the higher quality of the psychedelic experience. Also predict positive long-term effects. So I used it as an indicator of the quality of the experience. Anxious ego dissolution measures anxiety and loss of self-control. So it stands for less quality of the psychedelic experience. So I used it as an indicator of lower quality. There are 3 further dimensions which I will not explain. And there's also a score that I used which sums up all the scores of all dimensions, the total 5-DASC, and it indicates greater intensity of subjective effects. And I also used it as a measure of overall intensity. I'm going to have to be quicker, sorry, in 5 minutes more maybe. So, quick note on mystical effects. I think you all know that, but I used it also as a measure of the psychedelic effects. Both studies used the MEQ30 to rate the mystical type effects. It has 4 scales, and the mean score of all scales is the total MEQ30. So higher scores on total MEQ30 represent a mystical type experience. That's why I used it also in my study for the measurement of a positive mystical type experience. Okay, jump to the results. First, the openness. Openness significantly predicted higher scores on oceanic boundlessness. In the graph, you see all the scales of oceanic boundlessness, and the asterisk means it's significant at a level of 0.05, under 0.05. And the regression coefficients are displayed in the color. So the more red, the higher is the effect. So red color stands for positive effects. And then something changed when I included sex as an additional predictor of openness. Then openness did not predict higher oceanic boundlessness scores. And you see female sex has blue standardized coefficient, so it means it lowered the results on oceanic boundlessness. And I asked me why was that, and I had a closer look. And I found out this one, that openness only significantly predicted higher scores on oceanic boundlessness for male study participants. It is the blue line here. The blue regression is significant, and the female is not significant. Then I tested neuroticism. Neuroticism alone did not predict higher anxious ego dissolution scores, but you can guess, after including sex as an additional predictor, neuroticism significantly predicted higher scores on anxious ego dissolution. So female sex additionally predicted lower scores on anxious ego dissolution, and it was also what does that mean? And I found out it's like that. Same one as with openness. Only the male people with higher neuroticism showed higher anxious ego dissolution scores. So only significant for males and not for females. So this one is easy. Higher age, female sex, and previous use of serotonergic psychedelics had no effect on the intensity of the psychedelic effects of mescaline. So, okay. Let's get to the conclusion so that I have time for the sex differences I found very interesting. To sum this up, higher openness to experience predicted greater positive subjective effects of mescaline for male participants only. Higher neuroticism predicted greater negative subjective effects of mescaline also for male participants only. Age, biological sex, and previous experience were not significant. And importantly, sex differences moderated the influence of personality traits on the subjective effects of mescaline. That interaction, that's an interaction, was most likely caused by the sex differences within the neo-FFI traits I showed at the beginning. I will have a quick note on that. But first, the limitations. In a small study, you have outliers, and there was a number of outliers of male participants with very low neuroticism and very low anxious ego dissolution scores. So regarding the small study sample, this very likely affected the outcomes. The importance of openness to experience was small compared to the importance of drug dose when I tested that. And that's what I wanted to say at the beginning. The participants showed significantly higher scores in openness compared to a norm sample and lower scores in neuroticism. And that indicates a self-selection bias. That means, that's a big problem, I think, in studies with psychedelics. Typically, people with rather open, agreeable, extroverted, and non-neurotic characteristics self-refer to participate in psychedelic studies. And also other clinical studies with psychedelic observed that self-selection and positive expectations might bias the results and enhance positive psychedelic effects. So just 1 minute on the sex differences. That was interesting for me, and I think it's worth to share a side note on that. As I said, female participants got significantly higher in neuroticism than males. And this difference seems to be normal across nations and different life stages. So women tend to be a little bit more neurotic than men, but yeah, I don't know. But it applies to different populations across different nations. So also, neuroticism and openness are associated with altered serotonin receptor density. This might also explain the influence of personality traits on psychedelic effects, because serotonin triggers the effects of psychedelics. But concerning the sex differences, most clinical studies that I looked upon did not find or did not investigate sex differences in the subjective psychedelic effects. But I also just found 2 studies that found differences between the sexes, and that were like hypothesizing if women could be more susceptible to serotonin releasing properties of LSD or MDMA. A possible explanation for that I only found in preclinical studies, so studies with rats and rodents, but there were some, so I picked that. And they suggest that estrogen-serotonin interactions might influence the efficacy of psychedelics in female participants, because estrogen influences serotonin neurotransmission by affecting synthesis and release, and also estrogen modulates sensitivity and responsiveness of serotonin receptor subtypes in the brain. And this could potentially influence the efficacy of psychedelics in females. I've also found another preclinical studies that found sex differences in the reactivity of the central amygdala to aversive or threat stimuli. And this finding may be of importance because therapeutic efficacy of psychedelics is linked to central amygdala reactivity. And the last preclinical study that I found also showed that the behavior of rodents under LSD and psilocybin differs according to their estrous cycle. So it depends on what day in the cycle they were, if they reacted stronger or less strong to psychedelics. So these results, although they're from preclinical studies, may inform future studies to consider if the response to psychedelics may be different according to the participant's sex. Quick outlook: future psychedelic studies and therapy may be informed to put more emphasis on influence of biological sex on psychedelic effects, consider the influence of personality traits. Oh, that's not for me. I'm not here. Sorry. Okay, the influence of personality traits on psychedelic effects, and foster safety and effectiveness by accounting for participants' individual characteristics. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. Very nice talk and good critical outview on the whole topic of sex differences. So who got some questions? We got like 10 minutes, 11.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, did you consider the weight of the participants, the difference in there? Did everyone just get the same doses, or did you change the doses? Because I don't know if that has anything to do with the metabolization of the... I wanted to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Good question, because females normally have a lower weight than males. The studies that I used controlled for body weight. So the data that I had was already like controlled for body weight. So it was not influencing the effects of the females on the psychedelic effects. So, thank you. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. Can you please go back to the slide where you showed the correlation between the questionnaire items and openness to experience?
The heat map or the regression plot, you mean?
Heat map. This one, yes.
This one? With the females?
Yeah, this the first one. So I was wondering if the participants describe, for example, oceanic boundlessness as a spiritual experience, because we see that spiritual experience has a very light color, non-significant.
Yeah.
And we see oceanic boundlessness, for example, it's high correlation and experience of unity. So
yeah,
I was wondering if they describe it as something spiritual or not. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so oceanic boundlessness is not like the dimension term, and it includes all the other things here: experience of unity, spiritual experience, and the questions on the questionnaire are like coded for these different subscales. So that just means that people did not answer the questions that asked for spiritual experience as high as the questions for experience of unity. So you can discuss about if the questions really measure that, but that was just like the categories of the 5D ASC that I used. So I don't have the actual 5D ASC here because I could show you like what are the questions for spiritual experience, but that just means that people rather felt that they were united with the universe and didn't rate it as something spiritual in terms of God or terms of religious feelings or something like that. So that's the difference.
Okay. Thank you.
I also question, you mentioned that it takes longer for mescaline to kick in subjectively, and you also mentioned that the peak in the plasma is later. Do you know the pharmacokinetic reasons why this is so? Is it something with the absorption? Is it being distributed to non-brain areas or what?
So mescaline is not as specific on all the receptors that affect the psychedelic experience. If you look at it pharmacologically, LSD and psilocybin, they bind very specifically on serotonin 2A, 1B, and all the other serotonin receptors. Mescaline also binds, but not as specific, as mescaline. So it takes longer for the mescaline, to cross the blood-brain barrier. So mescaline is waiting at the door a little bit longer, and then you have to, push the door a little bit and raise the dose, and then the effects kick in.
But these two things are independent. Receptor binding and entering the blood-brain barrier have nothing to do with one another.
Yeah, but this would be two explanations for that. So
okay. Yeah. So, but this would not explain why the peak in the plasma takes also very long. So why does it take mescaline so long to enter the blood, actually, to peak there?
You mean that the plateau is long?
Yes, this was you mentioned in the beginning, right? That it takes.
No, I did not mention that for reasons, because I can just explain the other thing. But like the brain tissue, or like mescaline takes longer to enter into the brain, like to pass the blood-brain barrier, and that would explain why it takes longer to reach the maximal effect.
Is this your hypothesis, or has this?
No. I can. You can come to me later. I can show you data.
Okay. Thank you.
You mentioned that there's a correlation with amygdala and the effect of psychedelics. Can you explain to us?
With what? Sorry, I didn't understand.
That there's a correlation between amygdala and the effects of psychedelics. I have never heard this before. I find it very interesting.
Yeah.
I know that there's a correlation between neuroticism and amygdala size. So, can you tell us?
Yeah, it's just that we know that like drugs like LSD and psilocybin reduce the reactivity of the central amygdala, and that is correlated with the psychedelic effects. So that is helping, for example, for people, to feel better, after the trip, or also like to process like things like threats, internal and external threats better, and that means that psychedelics work therapeutically because they reduce the reactivity of the central amygdala. So, and that's what LSD and psilocybin do, and that has shown to be correlated with positive therapeutic effects.
That's very interesting. Do you know how they measured this?
How they measured the reactivity to
After the administration of the drug?
with the rats and the rodents. I don't know how they measured it with the rats and the rodents, but there are like human studies with on the reactivity of central amygdala that showed that after that, you know, the people had beneficial effects because of the reduction of the amygdala reactivity.
After the drug administration?
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, okay. So one question to the amygdala thing, because does it reduce it that in a normal or just in a normal way? Because, for example, when a person get into a more paranoid state or anything like that, or more in a schizophrenic episode or whatever, then I don't think, and this person is in a kind of fight or flight mode or anything like that, then I don't think that the amygdala is like naturally reduced by the psychedelics, isn't it? So it really depends on the person what is experienced there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know like the studies by heart,
Yeah.
you know, but I know that there's a tendency of psilocybin and LSD to reduce the reactivity. And you know, if you are in a state of constant hyper awareness, like if you have a PTSD or if you have an anxiety disorder, and you're constantly checking everything around you that could be threatening, it is a good thing that you reduce the reactivity.
Yes.
And then that you maybe feel a change.
But what is about re-traumatizing experiences, for example? So when a person has a psychedelic experience and then the trauma is coming up again, and then they get into this kind of state where they are really feeling all this fear and anxiety. Yeah.
That's an interesting question, but that would like more concern MDMA.
Yeah.
And I just looked at the LSD and psilocybin studies, so I really don't know if MDMA has the same effect on the amygdala.
Yeah.
To check on that. But yeah, good point.
Yeah, because I think sometimes it can be too reductionistic, I don't know, to explain things like that. So yeah, it reduces the activity of the amygdala, maybe it's it. But thank you very much.
So thank you for the talk. After your engagement with psychedelic experiences in relation to personality traits, I'm interested in your personal take with regards to how could we use this, for example, in therapy. I was thinking that there might be a very neurotic person who has a good day and still might have a very good trip. And on the other hand, you could have a very open person who has a terrible day, and then maybe it might end up in a bad trip. So I was wondering, how would you use it? Could it provide some value to practitioners or for the participants themselves?
Yeah, I think my main point would be like in studies where people self-refer and they have this typical characteristic that are high in openness and low in neuroticism, that studies look a little bit more on an equal distribution, you know, so that we don't have just these small variants in the personality traits, you know, just everybody with openness on this scale and neuroticism on this scale, because that could bias the results. That would be the first thing. And I think like there are so many predictors, there's so many factors that influence the psychedelic experience, and I think personality traits are important to have a look upon, but not the only thing, you know? So if you have people with complicated personality traits, like people with borderline personality disorder, for example, I think you have to be more sensitive and to measure the personality traits and maybe do a little bit of a stepwise therapy, like maybe begin with a small dose of MDMA, you know, not the LSD 200 dose for super neurotic person in the first place, because I think it would react with anxiety, you know. So like to consider individualized, what dose of what drug in what condition could be appropriate in terms of the personality traits.
Okay, we have time for one more quick question. Quick.
Did you read anything about that the menstrual cycle has an influence on the effects for women? Maybe the time where you take drugs is maybe very important.
Yeah, I would be happy if somebody made a study on that. I think there was one lady at the ALPS conference presenting a poster on that, and I think she had significant results that depending on the day of the menstrual cycle, I don't know if it's psilocybin or LSD, but there were differences. But I can have a look if I find it. But the data that I used was from animal studies. So yeah, it would be that's my point. Please have a look at that and not just give everybody. Men and women are not equally, are not the same things. So please like look at that in the future more. So,
Well, thank you very much, and give another warm round of applause for Sebastian.